Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the NEXUS podcast series. My name is Maria San Giuliano. I'm Research Director from Smart Venice, and we are one of the NEXUS project partners. Today, we are happy to be with you, delving deep into a very interesting topic, gender and intersectionality in research and innovation, with a specific focus on artificial intelligence and robotics research. We are honored to have with us one of the main experts at the European level on these issues, Professor Roger Søraa from NTNU. Good afternoon, Roger.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the podcast.
We are super interested into listening from your research. Before we start with the interview to Roger, I would give the floor to Sara Clavero, who is our project coordinator at the NEXUS project from Technical University of Dublin for a short introduction to the NEXUS Horizon Europe project. Sarah, the floor is yours.
NEXUS is an EU-funded project striving to make inclusivity a reality in the world of research and innovation. The project focuses on developing inclusive gender equality plans that span both in intersectional and intersectoral dimensions in 9 universities and in research organizations across Europe.
Thank you, Sarah, for the overview on what we do within NEXUS. To start introducing the topic, I would first introduce our keynote speaker first. Professor Roger Søraa, as I was mentioning, is Professor of Science and Technology Studies at NTNU and its Center for Technology and Society. He leads the interdisciplinary research group DigiCult that investigates how digital culture shapes society, and he's principal investigator in 2 large research projects: bias, mitigating diversity biases in the labor market, and social material transformations in Norway and East Asia. His main research focuses on how technologies such as artificial intelligence and robotics impact the daily lives and work of people. He has published extensively on these matters, for example, through the books AI for Diversity and Digitalization and Social Change, Guiding Critical Thinking. And he is engaged in many networks and research projects at the EU and global levels. So once again, Roger, thank you for being with us. If you agree, we could start by exploring the issue. We want to focus on potential negative impacts of ignoring gender and diversity in scientific research. So what do you think researchers and society are missing by not taking gender and intersectionality into account when designing STEM research and technology? And do you have any concrete example of gender and diversity blind research and innovation that you could share with us?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. From my work at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, focusing on AI and societal issues for many years, I have seen quite a lot of potential issues that can arise with technologies such as artificial intelligence. And this is something I have also been working on for the European Commission of Research as an expert on the group Gendered Innovations. where we made guidelines for how research projects and innovation projects can take gender perspectives into account. To mention some examples where gender issues can be important to take into account are, for example, machine translations, where we are seeing reinforcement of gender stereotypes historically. For example, when we transfer from one language to another, when we have a more gender neutral language such as English, and say the doctor goes to the bank, the nurse goes to the hospital, we don't necessarily have gender attached to those roles. But when we translate it to languages such as Spanish, for example, we get more gender stereotypes of the professions that are doing this. For example, having female nurses, male doctors as the stereotype. Other good examples of gender stereotypes that are being reinforced in technology development is with virtual assistants, where we are seeing that often virtual assistants are designed to be female, to have more caring qualities. But we have to ask ourselves, why is this the case? Is there something intrinsically female about being an assistant, or is it something about stereotypical societal values that is being transferred into technology? And a third example I would like to mention that we also have worked with in the Gendered Innovation Expert Group for the European Commission is facial recognition, because right now we are seeing quite a lot of facial recognition software being developed, but the faces that these recognition systems are recognizing are not being fairly distributed. So we see that primarily white males have their faces recognized in a much higher degree than other genders and people of color, for example. And of course, this is quite problematic because it's both about representation, who are present in the data, but it can also be dangerous if you are relying on technology that does not recognize you. So these are just some examples of when technology is designed in a biased way that prioritizes some people over other people.
Indeed. Thank you, Roger. This is really interesting to start with before considering what we could potentially do to really integrate a gender and diversity perspective when doing research in STEM and in particular in artificial intelligence. So continuing with our following question, I would point out at the fact that artificial intelligence, we all know, is one of the emerging technologies nowadays. It tends to trigger, on one hand, a lot of enthusiasm as something that could help solving several type of challenges and support innovation, but at the same time, it also tends to raise concerns in people. Some of these concerns are about reproduction of inequalities or limitation to freedom through increased control or even replacement of human work. So the real question, based on your recent research investigating and tackling gender and race bias in artificial intelligence applied to recruitment and hiring, would be on how concretely a gender and diversity approach can be integrated in the research on artificial intelligence, and which are the important factors to enable this?
Yes, thank you for that excellent question. And this is something we have been working with quite extensively in the bias project that I am leading, where you can look at biasproject.eu to read more on our website. But in this project that is running for 4 years, we are looking at the issue when someone is applying for a job. How can we really assure that the correct person gets the job? because we see historically that human hirers have a lot of biases on who they want to hire. For example, similarity bias, where we hire people who look and talk and have the same values as us, or there are also several other types of biases that humans have had throughout history. And now we are seeing that a lot of AI systems are being developed for hiring purposes to make it more efficient to do hiring, to automate certain steps of that process. But here we have to be very careful against reproducing existing biases that humans have had into the new hiring done by AI systems. And also to take the recommendations that AI hiring is giving with a grain of salt and a bit of critical thinking, which I think is important because AI is never neutral, as no technology is ever neutral. It comes with predisposed ways of thinking that the designers and developers have put into the technology. And we have to be aware that we're not giving a neutral recommendation when AI is saying that you should prefer candidate A over candidate B, because the AI models are trained on data that have historically preferred, for example, men over women. In the project, we are working very interdisciplinary, both from qualitative and quantitative research disciplines, from science and technology studies, legal professions, technology developers, and AI computer experts, as well as stakeholder engagement. And we are trying to really figure out how can we best give good recommendations when AI and humans are working together in an HR context.
Thank you, Roger. So I would take interdisciplinarity and critical thinking as keywords in terms of your suggestions on how better proceed with considering a gender and diversity approach in designing artificial intelligence. And moving forward, we could look closer into another disciplinary area, that is robotics. We know that you also have extensive experience in robotics and have worked in large-scale collaborative consortia on this topic. What key learnings and which concrete examples could you share on gender and intersectional sensitive and responsive approaches to robotics, and in particular in the field of human-robot interaction that we also know you are an expert, how interdisciplinarity is at play there, and how does it impact in tech design?
Yes, robots are a very interesting type of technology, often embodying artificial intelligence in a form that quite closely resemble humans in the case of anthropomorphic robots, or for example, zoomorphic robots that look more like pets. And I've worked quite a lot with robots, especially in healthcare, where we have seen a lot of applications of robots, for example, robot seals, robot dogs and cats, or these robots that look a bit more like humans. And I mentioned previously that AI is not a neutral technology, and this is the same with robotics. Robots are neither a neutral technology, but it's made by someone and for someone in mind. And we are also seeing that when robots are portraying certain genders or portraying certain cultural values, they are also reinforcing stereotypes of how, in the healthcare setting, for example, how care should be done and who should be doing care. But I think it is here important to keep in mind that technology is not set in stone, because designers and developers, they have choices in what they make and how they make them. And in the work we have been doing, for example, in the Robotics for EU project or the LifeBots Exchange project, which are two large EU projects that I have been involved in recently, we found that involving the general public with citizen engagement, having a large stakeholder engagement in the technology development is quite beneficial because often developers don't necessarily think of end users beyond what their marketability would say. And when the robot comes home to people and have to live in someone's home, it can be quite different from what it is on the drawing board. And in terms of human-robot interaction, how humans and robots interact can be quite different from what we imagine when it is being made to what is actually happening out in society. So as I mentioned, I'm based at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And one thing we saw with implementing robots in Norwegian society is that it's often quite snowy up here in Norway. So robots are not necessarily that well made to be outside when the temperature is below freezing and making it difficult for them to move. But again, one of our big societal problems when it comes to the weather is that it can be quite slippery. So some of our citizens that we interviewed, they were saying that the most efficient thing for them would be to have an anti-slippery robot that could help prevent falling from ice. But this is not necessarily what developers are focusing on. So I think it is important to see if we can bridge the gap a little bit between what people actually want and what is being developed right now. But we are still quite early in the robotic age, I would say, because there's a lot of experimentation, but we're not necessarily seeing that much of robots out in the market that are bringing the benefits that people would really want.
Thanks a lot. It's really inspiring, and clearly robots with their being resembling humans, as you were mentioning, embody artificial intelligence in a way that maybe other technologies don't, and really drive us to think if they are aimed at resembling humans, which parts of us we want them to reflect. Hopefully the best part, the most inclusive parts, the fairest parts, right? So overcoming a neutral standpoint on technology development and universalistic approaches, and thinking that technology is always designed by someone, as you mentioned, with someone in mind, and that choices can be done towards inclusiveness and fairness. It's really important. So thank you for that. In the next question, I would like to take the topic from a slightly different angle. So looking at how artificial intelligence can have an impact in universities and higher education organizations. In NEXUS, we are particularly interested into this. As you know, we deal with fostering and promoting institutional change to make universities more inclusive, both from a gender equality and intersectional perspective. And we know that from a report, a recent report from the European University Association, that there is an increased uptake of artificial intelligence by universities in the EU, but this is still limited. While we know that, for example, in UK and US, this is becoming widespread, particularly in students' admission. And this has raised concerns on biases and discrimination. To what extent do you think artificial intelligence can be conducive of inclusiveness when used by research organizations and universities in supporting the admissions process, teaching, recruitment, etc.? What attention points would you suggest to be considered?
Yes, working at the university, we certainly see a lot of artificial intelligence impacting our sector. One thing that is quite important is to try to go beyond the gender mainstreaming of just counting people. So we need to take the whole person into account. So not only counting the number of men and women, but asking which men, which women, or which people of other gender identities are being included in how we are presenting the student mass, for example, to AI, because otherwise we might get very simple solutions that might not be so helpful if we reduce this to very simple calculations. This is why I think it can be quite important to also triangulate data. So we can, of course, have the quantitative data that AI is quite good at, but I would also like to recommend good qualitative data on people's lived experiences, which can be quite more complex than can be seen in just a table or a diagram. And as you mentioned, EU is becoming quite strict and quite taken with AI, especially as we are seeing in the EU AI Act, which classifies certain AI as high risk. For example, facial recognition, as I mentioned in the beginning, is now being very strictly prohibited compared to, for example, what we are seeing in other regions, such as the US. And that I think can be quite beneficial for society when we have technologies that could potentially cause harm. But we have to be quite agile here because AI is being developed in a very quick pace, often a bit faster than regulations can adhere to. So it is important to be aware that new AI can be developed that we hadn't thought about before. For example, you mentioned my book, AI for Diversity. When I was writing that and publishing it in 22, 23, generative AI had not been as popular as it is now, also among students. And we have seen in the last couple of years that now we have a completely new challenge that we have to meet as educators on how students, for example, use generative AI, both to learn, but also to automate some of their learning processes. And this we have to be quite careful as learning institutions as well, I would say.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, Roger, for these reflections. There's really a need to adapt, but also to keep a critical outlook and to consider, as you mentioned, the regulatory frameworks that are there. So it's a complex challenge, indeed. The next point that we would like to discuss with you is about the concept of gendered innovations, and also an outlook on forthcoming policies from the European Union and the European Commission. Based on your being a member of the Gendered Innovations Expert Group, we know that that project has been pivotal in raising awareness and providing good practices on embedding a gender dimension in research and innovation. The second report that was released in 2020, that you also contributed in, manages to integrate an intersectional approach more substantially. But the impression that we have is that there is still a lot to do to build the capacity of higher education and research and innovation actors on this matter. Now, gender has become an evaluation criteria in Horizon Europe proposals. How do you believe that these issues should be addressed from the policy perspective in the forthcoming years by the new European Commission for the upcoming legislative period?
I think it is important to see this as a stepwise process, and the European Union should continue to build on this good work done with the gender innovation framework, for example. And gender perspectives as an evaluation criteria is one way of doing it, but it is not the only one. I recently came from a consortium meeting in Vienna with the Inspire project, which is working on inclusive gender equality in research and innovation as well. And we see a lot of these very exciting projects working on this. The great challenge is, of course, how can we take that to the market or to the sectors that have to implement this? And here I think policymakers are extremely important, and giving them good examples of technologies that work and technologies that don't work is key here. But it can be quite complex to navigate the world of AI, and suddenly it seems like everyone has become very interested in AI. We see that with search terms, for example, an explosion of also public interest in AI, because now the public is using AI also in their daily work life in a much higher degree than previously, especially with generative AI. But I think to come back to your question, how can we operationalize this? We have to make sure that we don't only make restrictions. So laws and regulations are very good, of course, to have to ensure that bad things don't happen with the technology, but we also need a cultural change towards inclusivity and opportunities for all, regardless of their background. And that's why it's so important to really get everyone to be part of the conversation and the development of AI, especially marginalized groups that can be excluded by the benefits that AI can bring. An example of how this can happen in practice is in the bias project, which was mentioned, where we look at procedural fairness in hiring, which means that when two people are applying for a job, how can we ensure that both candidates are asked the same type of questions? Because as I mentioned, with the historic bias, we see that women, for example, have much more of a focus on their personal life, such as family, while men get more questions about their career goals and such.
Thank you for your answer. And thank you overall for the interview. We have come to the concluding part of our podcast, and we would like to ask you for final remarks, if you have any, and in particular, any reading recommendations that you would like to give us.
Yes, and again, thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast. It's very interesting to see the work that is being done in this project. And for final remarks, I would like to encourage everyone to go a little bit beyond the technology and see what are the societal consequences. And I previously had a STEM background myself, but I got very curious about how technology is impacting society, which is why I decided to go into science and technology studies. So that is a curiosity I hope more people can also take into their approaches, especially when developing or dealing with technology. And even when you're trying out a new app or a new gadget, think a little bit about why is it designed the way it is designed, and who are potential people that are excluded from the design. So that's some final thoughts I'd like to give. And then regarding the question on
the reading recommendations.
Yes. For reading recommendations, I can recommend looking at the Gendered Innovation 2 report from the European Commission that I was part of, and also having a look at the Gendered Innovation website from Stanford University, which have some very good case descriptions and checklists that people also in STEM can work through when looking at gender and diversity. And then I'd like to recommend 3 books that I often come back to, thinking about ways that technology can discriminate, which is Rua Benjamin's Race After Technology, Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI, and Joy Bolumwini's Unmasking of AI, which I am currently listening to as an audiobook, which has been a great listening journey as well. So those are books I can highly recommend to everyone to pick up.
Again, heartfelt thank you, Roger. Also from on behalf of our NEXUS consortium. Yeah, to the next time, and to our listeners, I would just like to invite you to follow our forthcoming next episode of the NEXUS podcast series that will be focusing on intersectional practices in higher education and research organizations, where our guest speaker will be Professor Grace Ese Idaosa from the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge. Thanks again, and goodbye.